All right, so hello everybody and happy Friday. Welcome to our second virtual seminar of the semester. Today we are featuring another MSEM alumni, Daniel Berndt. A quick little bit about him. Daniel graduated from Millersville University, earning his bachelor's degree in meteorology in 2013 and master's in emergency management in 2015, formerly working at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania as the safety and emergency management specialist. Daniel managed both emergency management and environmental health and safety programs. So without further ado, Daniel, I will pass it on to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. All right. Well, we'll get started here. Again, just rolling with the punches here. That's kind of being the nature of flexibility and emergency management. That's what it's all about. Well, we'll get started here. So again, thank you, Brian, for the introduction. My name is Daniel Berndt, and I'm excited to be with you today. Good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. It's just after noon here in the Midwest, and good morning to those of you who may be tuning in either of the Western time zones. So again, my name is Daniel Berndt, and I want to talk with you a little bit about my own professional journey and hope that you find it interesting. If you didn't get a chance to watch Becky's talk a couple weeks back, I highly recommend her presentation on why empathy matters in communications before, during, and after disasters. And coming up after me is Amber Liggett, and I look forward to hearing her discussion on environmental hazards. So when I was asked to speak, I was talking with Sean about what he would like me to speak about. Looking back through all the speaker series to date, there's been so many fantastic speakers presenting on many facets of emergency management, as well as its correlation to various fields like the weather, disaster management, and plenty more. But my career has been a little bit different, and I've become more and more involved in the health and safety world, but often still find that emergency management continues to be an important part of my career, often meshing with environmental health and safety in some unique ways. So with that, I thought I'd speak with you today on this unique intersection of emergency management and health and safety. And I made a slight change to the original title just to focus on higher education specifically. So before we get started, unofficially or officially, I just wanted to share a little bit more about me, some background information. So as Brian mentioned, I got my bachelor's degree in meteorology from Millersville University, graduating in 2013. As Becky mentioned in her talk, most of us in the weather field seemingly have some defining moment in our childhood that helped propel our trajectories forward. For me, it was most likely the blizzard of 1995. Being a Pennsylvania native at that time, I think we got hit with just shy of 3 feet of snow in about 36 hours. So that stuck with me. However, I've also been told I learned how to read from the Weather Channel, reading the local on the 8's forecast. But that's neither here nor there. So while at Millersville, my eyes were open to an alternative pathway to use my meteorology background in the field of emergency management. And eventually began working toward my master's in emergency management from Millersville. While doing so, I tried to soak up as much as possible, completing as many ICS trainings as I could, going to in-person training opportunities, and even completing an internship with the Philadelphia Office of Emergency Management prior to graduating in May of 2015. Currently though, and I'll cover a bit more of this in the coming slides, but my wife and I now reside in Laredo, Texas, working for Texas A&M International University. If y'all ain't familiar with where Laredo is in Texas, don't worry. I didn't either until about a year ago, and we'll touch on that. So just a little bit more about me. As I mentioned, I have a wonderful wife who is an assistant professor of sociology with me here at TAMU, who is actually teaching sociology courses in disaster this semester and has been involved with other research in disasters. So we actually call ourselves the disasters power couple, where she teaches and I'm more on the practitioner side of things. We also have 2 cats. I enjoy pretty much anything that moves. I'm an Enneagram 2, wing 3. So my core motivations are helping others, And I'm also a Hufflepuff and INFJ. There's all your personality assessments for you. Also, as a fun fact, I have what's called grapheme color synesthesia, which means I interpret letters and numbers as colors. Another way to think about this is, do you know what the color green tastes like? Well, it's kind of like that. But anywho, that's enough about me. So I want to start out by talking about my career up to this point, because it's been quite the evolution from what I thought it would be. Also, I feel it's helpful to have some background in this, as well as it really defined my trajectory and helped me learn about what I do as a profession today. So first off, my passion has always been and still is the weather. Growing up, that was my life, and going to school for it was nothing short of a dream come true. At the time, though, I knew forecasting or other traditional trajectories didn't seem me. Then I was introduced to the emergency management world. And from then on, my focus was on emergency management and getting as plugged in as possible, learning as much as I could. So after graduating from Millersville, I began my first full-time job at Dickinson College as a safety and emergency management specialist. Dickinson College is a small, private liberal arts institution in downtown Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And fun fact, Dickinson was chartered in 1783, making it the first college to be founded after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Fun fact. So this was a new position in the Department of Compliance and Enterprise Risk Management, which allowed for a great deal of flexibility, in which the position began with an initial foundation in emergency management and evolved to encompass much more in the way of environmental health and safety along the way. This is truly where I was first introduced to the world of EHS. Having a limited background in health and safety, other than Dr. Hagelgans's OSHA 120 class on the fundamentals of safety, health, and environmental issues, as well as Dr. Speck's fire science course. Through these courses, though, and other related educational opportunities, I found myself wanting to learn more about this new area of health and safety, intrigued by a world still directly tangent to, but in a different lane than anything I had encountered previously. Over time, I assumed greater responsibilities, providing training to hundreds of staff on key topics such as bloodborne pathogens, fire safety, and more, learning about compliance, state and federal codes, standards and regulations, and managing several other safety-related programs out of our office. We were a small department of just 2 individuals, myself and my supervisor, whom also is an MSEM alum. But we found ourselves also are often wearing many hats and responding to the occasional emergency, even at 2 a.m. sometimes. Overall, this initial step in my career enhanced my passion for emergency management, while simultaneously cultivating an interest in safety as a profession. So in December of 2020, capping off a year that looked much different from what many had hoped for, I would assume, my wife was in the middle of completing her PhD in sociology from the University of Delaware, which, if you're not already familiar with, has a tremendous resource in their own CDRE equivalent, known as the Disaster Research Center, or DRC, which also features the infamous EL Core and Tele Research Collection. So I highly recommend checking out this fantastic resource. Anywho, my wife was on the job market, and long story short, she accepted a faculty position at Texas A&M International University. As for me, well, thanks to some good fortune and asking what ended up being the right questions, I ended up migrating to another institute of higher education, accepting a position also at Texas A&M International University in their Office of Environmental Health and Safety as an EHS coordinator, in which I reside currently. So TAMIU, for short, is a public university serving around 8,500 students on average, and is one of 11 universities in the A&M system. You may have heard of Texas A&M before, but what may be new to you is the breadth and scope of the Texas A&M system, which is much, much bigger than just the university and college station. The A&M system is actually one of the largest systems of higher education in the nation, with 11 universities, a comprehensive health science center, 8 state agencies, and the Rellis campus. And in addition, in 2019, the 86th Texas legislature passed legislation signed by Governor Abbott, which transferred the Texas Division of Emergency Management from under the Department of Public Safety to under the A&M University system, which is just massive. Having the Department of Emergency Management under the A&M blanket now has made responding to emergent situations a lot easier. For example, in town, we recently had a water main break, and we were able to procure pallets of water from the state at no cost and deliver them to individuals in need here at the university. So just recapping a bit, so up to this point, my educational and professional career has been somewhat of an interesting journey, starting with the world of weather and natural hazards, then migrating to studying emergency management, and eventually landing my first job that focused on this element. In that time, I learned a plethora about health and safety, as well as risk management, and found myself today in this field, but still utilizing the learned skills from my education. So as you're likely familiar with, everyone has a seat at the table in emergency management. And we all bring with us different skills that combine together for the greater good, which I really like. A safety expert? No, but I wouldn't consider myself one yet. But do I consider myself a safety professional and see myself staying in this field? Absolutely. So in the coming slides, my goal is to introduce you to what EHS is all about, the ins and outs, and how, despite it being an entirely different field, there are many intersections with emergency management and how we are still heavily involved with it in the world of EHS. So starting off, what exactly is environmental health and safety? Well, the American Society of Safety Professionals, or ASSP, puts it like this. So occupational safety and health professionals advise, develop strategies, and lead workplace safety and health management. They provide advice, support, and analysis to help employers establish risk controls and management processes that promote sustainable business practices. They work to reduce and eliminate fatalities, injuries, occupational illnesses, and property damage. They also provide advice on matters related to health and wellness and even security. So safety professionals often specialize in different areas such as ergonomics, industrial hygiene, training, occupational psychology, and occupational health, or in allied professionals such as nursing, fire protection engineering, or physiotherapy. Others may be more involved in environmental management, emergency management, or security. I really like this definition because I think there's room for addition as well. So over the years, I've met health and safety folks from many other industries, and I'll get to that actually in a couple slides. So through this, we can already start to see the parallels between the field of health and safety and emergency management with a core focus on safety. Though, as I'll cover in a few slides, with slightly different priorities and specific goals in mind. So if you're new to the world of health and safety like I was, I learned about different key players in the industry. In emergency management, we have our main agencies that govern or provide resources to first responders, meteorologists, elected officials, and more, including the likes of FEMA, state agencies, and other players like the American Red Cross, for example. In the safety world, though, there's numerous other agencies, organizations, or levels of government that develop codes, standards, and regulations, dictating many of the compliance-related elements that form the foundation of this profession. These include the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, U.S. Department of Transportation, Environmental Protection Agency, International Code Council, National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety, or NIOSH, National Fire Protection Agency, or NFPA, and many more. So the underlying theme in all of these codes, though, is the need to keep people safe in the workplace. It's kind of like going to the dentist, if you will, in a way. They're there to help you and keep you safe. But if you don't follow their guidance and recommendations, then that's on you. This, I've discovered, though, is at the forefront of every safety professional's mindset every day, doing what they can to promote, implement, and manage safety in the workplace. So as I briefly alluded to in an earlier slide, health and safety is a broad field with many, many areas of specialization. You can have individuals working in manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, oil and gas. In fact, I just attended a confined space training recently, and most of the folks there have worked or currently are employed in oil and gas. In South Texas, go figure. Healthcare is also a big one, along with construction and transportation. Some of these even have their own special codes that are different above and beyond state and federal regs that can be a challenge to manage compliance. Then at the bottom, we see education, but last doesn't necessarily mean least. In most institutions of higher education, ranging from community colleges to R1 universities, private colleges to public universities, and everything in between, you'll find at least some, if not a few individuals managing an institution's safety programs. As it turns out, higher ed, it really is its own microcosm of society, and often it can even function as a small city, or even serve as an actual city, like State College, for example. There's food that needs to be prepared, experiments and research being conducted, residential arrangements to be made, housekeeping, groundskeeping, trade staff, all to manage the institution, and each of these facets carry their own risks that need to be accounted for, managed, and considered in the grand scheme, and to ensure that the college or university keeps its doors open. Higher education like this can also have their own emergencies too, like fires, medical emergencies, chemical spills, and more. In fact, there's no shortage of YouTube videos on failed lab experiments dubbed as safe enough to perform in front of a large lecture hall without sufficient protection, training, or understanding of the chemistry. But I also like to call that job security, or for some, a liability. So each of the latter industries has their own special needs, regulations, and areas they focus on. For this presentation, though, I'll be focusing on those that pertain largely to higher education, given my familiarity with such. So on this slide, this is just a rough snapshot of what I would consider most EHS departments manage, including most or all aspects of fire and life safety. This could be fire extinguisher inspections, coordinating sprinkler pump tests, alarm maintenance, fire drills, building audits, the works. Then we have things like chemical safety. So this could be managing a campus-wide chemical inventory, training on chemical use, safety data sheets. We have lab safety, which can include chemicals as well as biological safety and radiological safety. So moving along, we have most campuses have some aspect of domestic or foreign travel, which comes with its own risks. Think back to when COVID really became a thing in March of 2020. By that time, there were untold numbers of students studying abroad that suddenly either needed to quarantine or come home rapidly. For many institutions, especially with the travel bans that started taking effect, this became a monumental logistics hurdle that still has ripple effects to this day. So that's just, again, another example of something that departments of EHS often focus on. So other focus areas could be compliance, waste management, also including hazardous wastes. Another area might be, let's say someone smells a suspicious odor in a classroom. You get a call and now suddenly you're playing a real life version of the board game Clue, trying to investigate the source of the concern and rectify it using equipment and any other tool at your disposal. We also engage with ergonomics, food safety, and plenty more depending on a number of factors. So there's no shortage of things to worry about. And so most safety professionals get really good at time management really quickly. So for most institutes of higher education, there is at least one or two people serving in capacities to address any EHS needs. However, the scope and depth of these EHS departments can wildly vary depending on the institution's age, footprint, focus, such as their scientific research needs, their population, their location, and more. Further, the larger the institution, often the larger the size of safety department you'll have. In smaller institutions, though, departments can be just as busy as those in larger institutions, with equal responsibilities that need prioritization of specific actions, often with limited resources. Skip ahead there. So while I was at Dickinson College, our department regularly handled many of these elements and occasionally something outside the realm that would need to be figured out. See, the interesting thing is when people have questions about safety, whatever it is, they often turn to you for answers as the safety professional, even if you don't necessarily have the answers at the moment. But that means it's now time to do some homework. But that's what makes the job interesting. Like in the world of emergency management, you never quite know what each day will bring. And you can plan your day, the whole thing, have time scheduled out for anything, but that can change at the drop of a hat. All it takes is one phone call, and now your whole day can be interrupted by a more pressing need. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but safety professionals have just as large of a hat collection as those in the emergency management world. And any given day, you can be wearing one or more of these hats, in some cases changing them from hour to hour. So what does a typical day in the world of health and safety look like? Surprisingly enough, this is a common question that I'm asked that can be surprisingly difficult to answer. First, every day is different. Again, just like those of you who work in emergency management, you know that things can come up, priorities can change, and you kind of just need to roll with it. So one day you might be sitting at your desk all day working on reports, answering emails, tackling other low-hanging fruit. And the next day you might be out in the field doing inspections, meeting with contractors or other third-party representatives, or doing things like conducting a fire drill. Further, you can have your whole day or week planned out, as I mentioned, but all it takes is one phone call of an odor of gas or a medical emergency or smoke in a building, and suddenly your plans change. So let me give you an example. So as it be of no surprise to you, the western part of the US right now is in the middle of a multi-year drought that is actually spreading eastward in parts of the country. Here in South Texas, we are actually beginning to feel those effects of it and have recently been upgraded to an extreme drought, according to the US Drought Monitor. So extreme is the second highest level of drought you can see. Now, the climate here is already what I would consider semi-arid. But even by climatological norms, it's been very dry recently. I think since November, we've only had about 3/4 of an inch of rain, something like that. I'd have to double check, but it's been very low. So conditions this week especially have been dangerous with low humidity, high winds, high temperatures, and lots of dry vegetation. As a result, we've actually seen wildfires been popping up here and there across the region. And yesterday, we actually woke up to a blanket of smoke across the sky. You could see it as the sun was coming up. There was just a layer of haze and smoke. Walking outside, you could even smell the smoke in the air, like you were standing next to a campfire on a crisp autumn night. So we started getting calls about the odor of smoke inside our buildings too. People could actually smell it inside. Now we've been actively monitoring this threat and have had briefings from the National Weather Service. And my window actually looks out across campus toward the brush country. So I have a pretty good vantage point of what's going on outside. And having gone through our hazard assessment, we get few occurrences of severe weather, flooding, and even hurricanes. But what has happened in the past are brush fires, given our proximity to, again, brush country. So in this case, fortunately, there was nothing nearby, but we still ended up, fielding those calls, going outside, looking for any signs of flames or smoke that might be approaching campus, because we needed to make sure we're keeping a pulse on what's going on and making sure we're keeping everybody safe. But this really shows that anything can happen at any time. And even in health and safety, we have the responsibility to drop what we're doing and respond for the safety of the community. Also, we're still also in the COVID-19 pandemic, and our department has helped with many other elements of the COVID-19 response on campus, procuring test kits and other supplies, helping with routine testing, and producing institutional protocols for the students, faculty, staff, and visitors alike. So much like in the world of emergency management, semper gumby applies, always flexible. This is a constant need to be flexible in health and safety, purely because of the breadth of responsibilities, as well as the nature of your work. But the key to all this often is efficiency. As I mentioned previously, unless you're working at a larger university, often safety departments are working with limited resources, limited personnel, limited time, and even limited budgets. So what you'll find are individuals making every move count, but also leveraging technology and putting systems in place to manage competing priorities and ensure compliance. So how many of us find that we don't have enough time to do the work that just needs to be done during the day? Me? Everyone? Well, you're not alone. EHS is no different from other fields with the various regulatory requirements such as inspections, reports, trainings that all need to be done, and finding the time to tick all of the boxes can be challenging. Much like in emergency management, there are constant ebbs and flows with the workload, but overall, I'd say being as efficient with what you do has a huge impact on the end result. Making every move count, combining trips, setting up automations and systems to help you out really go a long way, especially if you're a small operation. And this applies to both fields where, again, time and resources can be limited and you're having to make do with what you got sometimes. Even when it comes to things like planning an emergency exercise, these efforts don't just happen overnight. And they involve lots of planning, meetings with internal and external agencies, as well as gathering resources and lots of communication on top of your other day-to-day duties. This can require a lot of time and energy, which places a great emphasis on efficiency. Now, some may argue efficiency is the enemy of safety, but that's a debate for another day. So when looking at environmental health and safety and emergency management, it's apparent there are elements of overlap between the two, and the biggest ones are the need to promote safety and manage risks. Risk is truly at the core of understanding the basis for both fields, planning for the unknown and producing ways to manage or reduce risk. Risk often precedes action and vice versa. And when you think about it, is the reason why these professions exist in the first place. Attempting to understand your own risk, the risk for others, and considering all the potentials with the goal of keeping everyone safe through risk reduction strategies that reduce the likelihood of bodily harm, as well as other components such as reducing or eliminating the potential for external factors to cause disruptions to business practices. In essence, this also ties in nicely with elements of business continuity as an extension of emergency management. For example, OSHA actually has numerous standards that examine this. For example, with their confined space standard that requires an evaluation of your rescue team and having a plan in place before any confined space entry occurs. Then you also have the NFPA 1600 standard, which focuses on disaster planning. Even FEMA has courses at their Emergency Management Institute on the chemistry of hazardous materials for safety professionals. So in that respect, emergency management also has its roots in risk with those at the local, state, or federal levels, often interacting a lot with it, whether it be facilitating programs, conducting training or exercises with internal or external stakeholders, procuring goods and services, and or coordinating logistics either on the front end or dealing with it as a result of hazards after they've occurred. So risk is everything in these fields, and the byproduct of risk management is safety, or at least the goal of safety. Also, from a personnel standpoint in higher ed, oftentimes the same staff handling day-to-day safety elements are frequently the same ones handling the occasional emergency, sometimes at 2 a.m. Typically, the smaller institutions and even some of the larger ones lack dedicated emergency management personnel and instead rely upon their own institutional staff, including those in health and safety, to assist with emergency response. For example, at Dickinson College, we had an emergency response team that was comprised of representatives from various departments, filling ICS-based roles such as marketing and communication staff handling the PIO role, risk management staff handling planning, and our public safety staff handling the safety officer duties, amongst other responsibilities. So EHS has a duty to not only manage the day-to-day responsibilities, but to also be that conduit to and from emergency services for the good of the campus community and community at large. So one could say environmental health and safety is routinely focused upstream, trying to stay ahead of and understand risks before they become emergencies and put systems in place to manage, mitigate, or to eliminate such risk prior to an occurrence. So often safety is looking at these what ifs and also then what? What if I have a pipe burst and flood the biology wing with ongoing research? What if I have a lawnmower throw a stone at a car and break its windshield? What if I have a medical emergency on an upper floor of a building when the elevator is down for maintenance? It's this kind of thinking and responsibility that truly integrates these two fields of health and safety and emergency management. So in the emergency management world, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the emergency management cycle here seen on the slide. That is prevention, preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery, then repeating. So the process is never finished, per se, rather encompassing varying degrees of implementation and execution. So this constant cycle, albeit slightly different, I found to exist in the world of environmental health and safety as well. Take, for example, fire and life safety. It all starts with your hazard assessment. Both emergency managers and health and safety professionals start from the same place, attempting to understand what potential risks exist, and then taking steps to plan for and prevent that instance from possibly occurring. So beyond this, there are countless efforts both fields incorporate, spending time, money, and energy promoting preparedness topics as a starting point. So in higher ed, we understand students can be their own vulnerable population subtype. So in the EHS world, we focus a lot on educating students about fire safety, accessing emergency resources, policies and rules that prohibit certain appliances due to their fire risk, like toasters and incandescent string lights. But emergency managers do this as well, albeit for generally the community at large, pushing things like smoke detectors and having escape routes for, in home situations, for example. Then mitigation strategies are implemented, like maintaining your sprinkler systems and fire-ready construction, most of which are based heavily in code compliance, in which emergency managers and health and safety professionals work to put systems in place to ensure that these elements are in good and working order. So again, this is all based on your potential what ifs, in some cases reactionary, and other cases preventative. Then there's the response and recovery processes where an incident occurs, and after all the reports are written, findings found, hot washes held, a key step both entities often engage in is then putting systems in place to recover from and prevent a similar incident from occurring again. Keeping with our fire safety example, it could be something like an individual having started a fire with a candle. So we implement policies and procedures to prevent individuals from using anything with an open flame. Now, continuing and kind of keeping with the theme of the emergency management cycle, though, I found this great comparison in research from Vassiliou and Kahn, expanding upon the actions that occur after response and recovery, but before we can begin the work of prevention, and referring to it as the disaster management cycle. So I really like this because here we can clearly see on the slide the overlap between the worlds of health and safety or risk management and crisis management or emergency management. And again, just for clarification, I recognize risk management is actually in and of itself its own field. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'm aggregating risk management together with environmental health and safety, given the overlap and oftentimes inclusion of this field in EHS programs. I think the key takeaway here is I found EHS/risk management often encompasses the same fundamentals of the disaster cycle, but in a slightly different scope. In other words, emergency management is often involved in all of these elements, but oftentimes tends to be focused more on the response side of things, generally speaking. On the flip side, EHS/risk management also is often involved in all of these elements, but generally speaking, tends to focus more on the prevention and mitigation side of things, often working behind the scenes to put processes in place to ensure success, reduce risk, and ensure everyone goes home to their families at the end of the day. So when looking at this nexus between emergency management and environmental health and safety, there are many similarities which focus on people and processes together for the goal of safety. Really, one of the biggest correlations is the emphasis on networking and developing relationships before an incident occurs. For example, a good safety professional should be on a first name basis with their local fire chief and health department, as well as their local emergency planning committee, or LEPC. The LEPC, for example, is a great resource because you're educating them and they're educating you, all while simultaneously supporting community safety. If you're in the safety world, I highly encourage you to check out your local LEPC because of their ability to assist you on multiple levels. While at Dickinson, I actually served on the Cumberland County LEPC and still provide support today, despite the distance, because I believe in this important relationship and resource, as well as maintaining those relationships. So an additional similarity we often see is getting buy-in on different initiatives, as well as developing and implementing systems to ensure compliance. For example, working with your facilities department on putting administrative or engineering controls in place to prevent individuals from entering a hazardous atmosphere. So this brings us what I think, again, is the bottom line for both emergency management and health and safety, which is safety. Safety is fundamentally baked into everything we do because we as humans are not perfect and make mistakes. And so we are constantly battling the what if to stay ahead of risks and manage those that's slightly more difficult to predict or eliminate outright. So the fascinating part, as this field continues to evolve along with emergency management and become more integrated across the spectrum, is seeing more research come out and finding new and better ways to keep people safe. Even something like the evolution from the standalone blue emergency phones that you've probably seen on college campuses to smartphone-based apps. So before smartphones, if you had an emergency, you had to, one, know the number for emergency services, or two, track down and stand at a blue emergency phone while your call is processed. Nowadays, a lot of institutions have apps that can track and share your location with others and summon emergency services automatically if you push the right buttons. So leveraging this technology to aid business practices is especially essential in today's world, and sharing safety information between your business and first responders, your LEPC, or local county or state EMA is often just a few clicks of a button away. Something like even sharing your emergency operations plan with the fire department can go a long way towards bridging gaps and reducing delays during an emergency. So as I begin to wrap up here, I just want to take a few moments and share with those of you who may find yourself in environmental safety or a related field, maybe totally outside the field, or perhaps even going through the MSEM program and considering what other opportunities might exist with this education in emergency management. First off, I personally have been involved with the local hazmat team, volunteering there, and even working my way up through getting trained as a hazmat technician, also volunteering with the fire department, kind of learning various safety components from the rescue side of things, which helped me in my professional day-to-day opportunities. Also getting involved again with the LEPC, as I mentioned. This is in fact where I learned the most about, having the importance of networking with those around you, because there are so many people who come to the table and they bring their own experiences and backgrounds and skill sets that tapping into those resources are essential. And you also have plenty of other opportunities for professional development or credentialing, such as being a certified safety professional or CSP, or maybe a certified fire inspector, just as CFI. What's cool is that in this world, there's often pathways from careers in the emergency response or emergency management fields directly into health and safety or related fields like consulting or insurance. For example, some of the insurance auditors I've met were previously firefighters and whatnot, and bring with them an incredible knowledge base on things like fire safety systems or building construction that you can then leverage to make your own programs better So the biggest takeaway I'd like to stress talking about the profession of health and safety is that there's always something new to learn. There's always some new code or question that comes up that needs solving. And there's always new people to meet that have different experiences or backgrounds solving problems you may need to solve down the road. So a colleague, friend, and mentor of mine would routinely say to me that if you ever encounter someone who doesn't want to learn anything new anymore, run far away from them. In this field, and like in emergency management, you can always learn something new and find better ways to do something. And often the best way to do that is by surrounding yourself with people who know much more than you. And when keeping people safe is what's at stake, you can never learn too much. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. Thank you to Millersville University and the CDRE for the opportunity to speak with you today. And also thank you for attending this talk. If there's anyone who has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was great. If you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, put them in the chat. Questions?
Looks like Lisa has a question.
Yes, thank you again, Daniel. I enjoyed it. Did I hear you correctly in the beginning that the Texas Emergency Management Agency is transferred under Texas A&M system? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. So, I mean, for lack of a better term, the entire Texas Department of Emergency Management is now under the A&M blanket. So again, the Texas A&M system is more than just universities, but it also has things like the Texas Engineering and Extension Services, or TEEX. You also have the Texas A&M Forest Service. I'm actually just looking at a diagram I have right next to me.
Sure.
You have the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. You have their Health Sciences Center. So it's kind of this network of different agencies that function for the state of Texas. And the A&M system is a public university. So in essence, it almost functions as a government system. I hope I'm actually explaining this right. I'm still learning all the ins and outs about how the system kind of works and manages itself. But going back to your question, so yes, TDEM for short was recently incorporated now under the A&M system.
Okay.
Texas, which is just a fascinating organization. So.
Yeah, I was going to say that's fascinating to me, and I understand. I'm sure the decision to restructure it in that way, if that's the right word, I'm sure that's a very complicated decision that is beyond a webinar. But are you able to tell me briefly, was it motivated by funding efficiency, resource efficiency, personnel efficiency? I just find that structure interesting, and maybe it's more common than I realize.
Sure. Again, I'm still learning kind of all the ins and outs about this system and the integration. I can't say for what exact reasons this restructuring occurred. I'm not sure what the underlying factor was for it, but I can look at that and get back to you. I'm curious myself as to why this shift occurred, but it certainly has a lot of benefits. It's benefited us again as an educational university where we have a little bit more access to certain resources, and we can coordinate and build those connections with some of our true emergency managers more effectively. We can have those easier connections, and up to this point, I've seen nothing but benefit to it.
Very good. Thank you so much.
I see there was a question dropped in the chat as well. from Connor. How did COVID affect your operations at Texas A&M at Dickinson?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, how how many more hours of time do we have to talk about the all the ins and outs? Um, Let me try to summarize it if we can. So when I was at Dickinson, um, as you probably saw, COVID disrupted many institutions across the country. It really started with, I believe it was the University of Washington on the West Coast, closing its doors, saying, you know what, this is getting bad enough that we're going to shut down. That was mind blowing to me. We had never seen something get to that level where an entire institution just says, nope, we're shutting down, we're closing our doors, we're sending the students home. Um, and so we found that oftentimes as we were trying to stay ahead of things and plan for contingencies, a lot of those contingencies ended up needing to come to fruition. And things happened very quickly. Um, there were daily meetings that were occurring. Um, so many people came to the table. Just the international or the students studying internationally was a huge element. How do we get hundreds and hundreds of students home or safe, amidst this global pandemic and closing borders. So things got pretty crazy pretty quick. And eventually, Dickinson, like many other institutions, ended up closing its doors as well. Now we had some things working for us that gave us some more time. Like actually, for most institutions, I think it was around, if not during their spring break, that COVID really started to kind of take off and become what we know it as today. So during that week, it gave administrators and other individuals time to kind of really process through the implications of this. So, how are we going to handle this? What do we need to do? What contingencies do we need to put in place? And Dickinson actually extended their spring break by a second week, gave us more time to, again, plan for things and eventually go fully remote for the remaining of the semester. So that time was spent, working with professors, getting their courses online. And for us, even in our department, we went home. A lot of people, unless you absolutely needed to be on campus, went home. Even staff like groundskeepers and housekeeping, because there's no one on campus. So a lot of things were shut down, and then people kind of slowly started trickling in a little bit, once or twice a week. Our office would come in as needed to handle different obligations on campus. But by and large, a lot of people worked from home. And then so it was just this kind of slow and steady, methodical ramp up back to more of an in-person strategy. And it was just a lot of collaboration with different folks. Everybody had a seat at the table. We had, our director of the Wellness Center providing a lot of subject matter expertise on the science of COVID and different precautions. We had our study abroad folks at the table talking about, how we're going to keep students safe and what does that whole program look like. We had public safety, we had dining, we had, again, anybody, just like a typical emergency response at the table, thinking through all these different logistics of how do we still give students a college experience while at the same time practicing social distance, having different precautions in place, things like that. And then so coming to Texas A&M International, they were doing a lot of the same things. They had closed their doors as well. But really the biggest difference that I've discovered here at A&M is they were a lot more at the forefront of things. They were helping with, vaccine distributions, specifically the Office of Environmental Health and Safety. And a lot of this happened even before I joined the team back in August of 2021. But even to this day, we're still helping with providing hygiene supplies on campus. We actually have a number of mask stations, and they have some hand sanitizer and tissues with them. And so just managing those supplies. Keeping up to date with policies and procedures. I mean, as I'm sure you heard, we all just saw that now boosters, a second series of boosters for those 50 above that are, I believe it's immunocompromised or have other health sensitivities, is now authorized. So what does that mean for an institution? Do we need to pivot? So we're kind of looking at our different plans and helping with different components like that. So it was a lot of behind the scenes work and coordination to different degrees, again, depending on the institution. But that's kind of how the operations were affected in a way. Just a lot of contingency plans, a lot of business continuity talks, and how do we keep things running without physically being there? Good
Any
question.
other questions? All right, well, we will end it there then. Thank you, everybody, for attending our second virtual seminar. Once again, I deeply apologize for all of the issues that we had at the beginning there. It was a bit crazy at the start, but thank you, everybody, for coming. Feel free to join us for our final seminar this semester coming up on April 22nd. Otherwise, have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you. You're welcome.
You didn't get